It's March. That means it's survive in advance time. Is exactly what BYU did as they take care of business against Iowa State. What to make of this quarterfinal win over in the Big 12 tournament and what to expect as BYU advances now to the semifinals. It's all going down in a new edition of Locked On Cougars.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And as always, thank you to all of you who are everydayers with us right here on your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at TurboTax, ready for stress-free taxes and get the most money back guaranteed. Head over to TurboTax.com, and get matched with your expert today. All right, coming up on today's show, we talk about BYU's thrilling quarterfinal win over Iowa State. We'll also talk about why some comments I made on Wednesday have stirred up a little bit of ire amongst Cougar fans, and we'll finish off today's show with our weekly mailbag from our Locked On Cougars insider group. So without further ado, BYU gets the win over Iowa State 96-92, and I got to say at the outset, what an incredible game that was. If you don't like entertaining basketball, I am sad for you because that was a game that I think delivered in every facet. Now, it's obviously better that BYU won when it comes to this podcast and you as Cougar fans because you want to see your team win. But the nice part was that was a game that BYU got severely tested. Iowa State came in and down two of their starters, still gave BYU everything they could handle. I said in the open of today's show, survive and advance is the motto this time of year when it comes to tournament action. It's one and done. You lose, you're out. And BYU's mentality, I think, understands and reflects that whole idea is that, hey, we know what we're up against here. Let's go out there and do what we can do to keep this going. Now, there's the argument out there, and we talked about it on Wednesday, about should BYU lose in this game? No, they shouldn't have, because I think this is a team, speaking of BYU, as they pile up more and more of these wins, the stacking up of days, as Kevin Young likes to call it, they are continuing to add wins, Q1 wins in particular. They're going to help them have a better seed than they could have ever hoped for before this now 9-game win streak began. This is a BYU team that is trending towards being a 4, maybe a 5 seed if they continue at this pace. Now, tomorrow they will face off against the Houston Cougars. Now, Houston still has to beat Colorado, but I fully expect it'll be the Houston Cougars advancing to the semifinal against BYU. And looking forward to that matchup, and we'll preview it more in depth here in just a little bit. But reflecting on this game, the nice part was BYU, remember, they went up 10 points. It was 25-15. And then essentially the rest of the first half, ISU could not miss. It was absolutely incredible. Curtis Jones, I said it on Twitter, he was straight up jimmering BYU. I don't invoke the name Jimmer very often on this podcast, but the threes and the shots he was hitting, they were Jimmer-esque. And the nice part was BYU, as Kevin Young is very good at doing, adjusted. They started double teaming him in the second half. In particular, when Iowa State would put on a run or two, they'd change up the defensive philosophy. The zone defense in particular came in clutch for BYU in this game, going to that 2-3 zone. It really helped slow down this Iowa State team. And it was a game that BYU was going to have to play at a breakneck pace because, as I mentioned, you have two guys for Iowa State, Lipsy in particular, that were out. Well, when they don't have all of their horses, the thing that BYU can do that very few teams can do like that is be able to run on them. And BYU goes 10 and 11 guys deep, so they have enough fresh bodies to go at this. Now, that depth will be tested severely, it feels like, tomorrow in this semifinal matchup against Houston because of just how physical Houston is. But this Iowa State team, they're no slouch either. We heard in one of the timeouts, they came back from break on ESPN2, and they went to the Iowa State huddle, and you heard TJ Otzelberger say, get physical with these guys. Be slamming into their bodies. We want to make them feel us. That's what Iowa State does, and that will actually help BYU as they go up against probably, quite possibly, the most physical team in all of college basketball tomorrow in Houston. But I look at this as a huge win on the resume for BYU because it shows they can win in yet another fashion. This is a game BYU's defense, it struggled. They got torched for 92 points. But yet again, the offense, it showed up, and it helped BYU get over the top, and that's all you can ask for if you're a Cougar fan right now. Biggest thing I will take away from this game is the contributions from across the roster in this one. You had 23 points from Richie Saunders, none bigger than that three-pointer he hit with about 48 seconds to go. That put BYU up 4. And at that point, the win probability surged up for BYU, up 4 with 48 seconds to go. It becomes a free throw shooting contest. And BYU, to their credit in this game, very good from the free throw line. 18 of 21, 85.7%. That's what you want to see from this BYU team as they improved to 24-8. You got contributions, as I said, from across the roster. Trevin Knell, he had 11 points early on in this one that kept BYU afloat amidst that flurry that came from Iowa State. Mihailo Boskovic had 2 big threes in particular in that second half. He contributes 10 points, 5 rebounds. He's rounding into form as that stretch 4 that BYU needs, offers the size, but also the athleticism you need to be able to guard on the perimeter, but goes in and rebounds at a high level. Foose continues to do Foose things. So he was 5 of 6 from the field, 5 of 5 from the free throw line, and 15 points. It's exactly what Fousseyni Traore does. He just goes in there and he becomes a focal point of what you can do. You can run the offense through for BYU. But that doesn't even preclude Keba Keita, 9 points, 10 rebounds. Mawit Mag, 6 points. Jaeger Demon, okay, not his best stat line, 3 points, 3 assists, 3 rebounds. He also had 4 turnovers, but Jaeger still is a guy that his passing is, you heard Fran Fraschilla say, he's the best passer at his age in the entire world. And he did tee up his teammates a couple of times. So really, really impressive stuff from BYU. 24 assists on their 30 made field goals. They're 50% from the 3-point line, 18 of 36. Yeah, this is a game that BYU showed yet again when their offense is humming like it was in this one. They can hang with anybody, but more importantly, they can outgun teams as well. March Madness is a very interesting dichotomy of styles of play, because that's obviously one thing that we'll have to monitor in the lead up to Selection Sunday is, okay, who is BYU paired up against, and what is the style of play that they play like? The one thing about this BYU team is their versatility. It's really unmatched. We've seen this BYU team win gritty, downright defensive struggles down the stretch part of the season. We've seen in a game like this where they can just simply outgun an opponent. The versatility of this BYU squad is going to be a major calling card for them, and why I was talking with a person who works in college basketball out of state earlier this week, and they said that BYU is one of my dark horse teams. And my response was, well, dark horse for what? He said, Sweet 16. And he said, I just think that they have got the versatility of being able to make a run here in March Madness. And they pointed directly to the fact that BYU can do it with a myriad of different things and also use different guys to accomplish those means. I didn't have Mihailo Boskovic hitting big threes in this game, but it's awesome to see a guy like that come in. He and Trey Stewart were key factors in sparking what is now a 9-game win streak. Remember, all the way back at that West Virginia game. Had they not come in and provided that spark against the Mountaineers, who knows how the rest of the season would have played out for BYU, but they did just that. And the Cougars are absolutely riding high right now as a result. So huge win today, an absolute barn burner. It set the record for most threes combined made in a game. They actually almost had that like halftime. There was 20 made threes at halftime. The record was 27. And between Iowa State and BYU today, they made 31. Iowa State made 13 of 30, whereas I mentioned BYU was 18 of 36 overall. So really, really high-level basketball. The fun part was it had a really nice flow to it until the final 5 minutes when the referees seemed to inject themselves a little bit more into this one. But overall, I think a well-played game, well-deserved victory for BYU. They kept their turnovers down overall, just 10 for the game against 9 for Iowa State. 12 fouls overall for the Cougars against 22 for Iowa State. So this was a really, really clean game for Kevin Young, and he's got to be pleased with that part of it. But he obviously is a guy who's got an offensive mind, and you could tell that as this game was progressing, that he was getting into his bag of tricks and really kind of unloading things for BYU to run in this. And by and large, they all worked. So that's the fun part about this. Now, there was a comment I made on Wednesday's show that the comments in response to it have been a little bit interesting, and I want to delve into that. We'll also get to your guys' comments as well about this game in particular, and we'll do all that as we roll on right here on a live edition of Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, hey, where'd all that money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track of all that money. We all know that. That's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, or you can just just so you can stop managing money and start actually building wealth. That's what they want to do here for you guys. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch Money to check your finances, track spending, and more importantly, even plan for long-term goals. And as we mentioned, start building that wealth that we all want to have. So take control of your finances today and do it with our friends at Monarch Money. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com. It's Monarch like a butterfly. For 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com. Use that promo code LOCKEDONCollege to get started today at Monarch Money for half off your first year. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over at Factor. Now, all of us want to eat healthier. Trust me, I'm right there among the masses out there. The best part about Factor is they're here for you guys that are chef-made, dietitian-approved meals, and they are heat and eat in just 2 minutes. You can fuel your body without the hassle of cooking. Factor meals arrive fresh, never frozen, with 40 options across 8 dietary preferences each week, so you can customize your menu to fit your goals, whether that's calorie smart, protein plus, or even keto, and a bevy more. The best part is convenience meets nutrition. All of us want to eat healthier. Factor makes it nutritious but also delicious at the same time, without the time-consuming gap of having to buy the food, cook the food, enjoy the food, and the like. So get started today with Factor. Go to factormeals.com/factorpodcast and use the promo code factorpodcast to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's promo code factorpodcast at factormeals.com/factorpodcast to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box from our friends over at Factor. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Jake Hatch here. BYU basketball getting a huge win over Iowa State in the quarterfinals of the Big 12 tournament, and they will now await the winner of Colorado and Houston. Can you imagine if Colorado, the 16 seed, knocks off number 1 seed Houston? I'm not banking on it because I just think Houston's almost unbeatable at this point, but regardless, that's beside the point. Huge win for BYU as they advance now to the semifinals. So I had a comment I made on Wednesday's podcast about I said, I want to see Kevin Young tighten BYU's rotation. And the comments almost to, like I said, 90 to 10% ratio were saying, well, why would you tighten the rotation, Jake? It's a calling card of BYU's team this year. I get it's a calling card of BYU's team. I absolutely acknowledge that fact. They've been playing a 10, 11, even 12-man rotation at points and doing quite well with it. The reason why I mentioned I'd like to see Kevin Young tighten the rotation here in the postseason is because he has almost acknowledged it himself. He says, I'm a process-oriented individual. What he means by that is he comes from the NBA. In the NBA, during the regular season, you try new things. You can play 8, 9, 10 men in the NBA in your rotations. But when it comes to the postseason, you tighten the rotation to 7 or 8 guys, but it does not mean that you bench guys and never let them off the bench. I think that's where my comment may got a little misconstrued here, is that Kevin Young is going to tighten the rotation. I expect that, but it's going to be dependent on the matchups in March Madness. He will go into these games when it comes to the postseason with an idea of saying, okay, here are my 7 or 8 core guys, and depending on how the game goes, we may have to expand it out and play that 8th, 9th, 10th, or 11th guy and let them see what they can do. That's why BYU's 9-game win streak simply got started at West Virginia, is because they had nothing going with what was then essentially an 8-man rotation. They injected a guy like Mihailo Boskovic as well as Trey Stewart into the lineup, and that proved to be a major factor in getting that win in Morgantown and spurring, once again, what's now a 9 straight wins for the Cougars. So that's the rub here, is it feels like Kevin Young, yes, he is a process and just a details-oriented dude, and trust me, you look at how BYU operates in-game, you can tell that he has a way of operating his program that he has from years of experience, both as a head coach in the G League, but also as an assistant in the NBA, and he runs a very NBA-esque model. We've talked about this ad nauseum on this podcast. Almost everything BYU does is NBA style, and that means that, yeah, the rotation, it's very likely to get ratcheted down here. And a guy like Cannon Catchings, pending how his knee is recovering, you very well may never see him hit the floor again for BYU. And that's sad to say, but he didn't play against Iowa State. I'd be hard-pressed to believe that in 24 hours' time, he's going to be available against Houston. Maybe we see him next week in the NCAA tournament. Maybe BYU says, hey, our matchup, pending who the opponent is, we need shot making. And that's what Cannon offers. He gets injected into the lineup and into the rotation cold after sitting out as long as he did because of his abilities. That's the thing about the rotation conversation for Kevin Young here is this is a team that has proven that it doesn't matter what guys' roles are. They embrace them and they make sure they execute them to as high a level as they possibly can. And the results speak for themselves right now. 9 straight wins and rocketing up the seeding charts. I think it was Robbie McCombs. I saw this right before I went live, is that BYU has gotten 6 Q1 wins and 3 Q1A wins. You want the breakdown of that? Q1A is essentially it's like a top 30 team that you've beaten on the road or on a neutral court. The wins BYU's piling up right now are going to have the selection committee saying, okay, yeah, we absolutely need to have BYU higher up on the seed line. Maybe they'll climb as high as a 4 seed if they were to win the Big 12 tournament. I think that's probably the peak BYU could reach. But right now, aren't they arguing for a 6 at worst? That's the nice part about this. And we've seen a BYU team that, once again, their versatility and the ability to, I think, adjust that rotation in game depending on how games are going. That's a nice calling card to have. So, yeah, I expect that rotation still to be tightened down where you go into a game thinking, yeah, we're going to play these 7 or 8 guys, our core group here. But if the game dictates otherwise, hey, then the other guys get an opportunity to go out there and play that. All right, so some of the comments here, let's get to some of them, and some of them match up with this. Blind Man says it's really good to see BYU can play a physical team and win. It's true, and it gets even more physical tomorrow against Houston. I don't know how many of you heard my radio show this morning with DJ and PK on the KSL Sports Zone. We had Travis Hansen on, and one of his former teammates from his pro days is one of the assistants at Houston, and Travis was talking about how Houston, they practice super physical. Like Kelvin Sampson doesn't take it easy on his guys in practice because he wants them to be like the borderline, almost fouling you, and in some cases fouling you every time you come down the court. They want you to feel them, speaking of the Houston Cougars. Iowa State's in a similar vein to that. So that's a good point about BYU being able to play a physical game and win this. A couple of the things here I saw from some people is that both ISU games are top tier entertainment from Cholito. I agree with that. It was top tier entertainment. Now, the game at Iowa State, giving up a 21-point halftime lead, some would argue that's not entertaining as a Cougar fan, but there was entertainment, absolute entertainment for BYU. Other things, free throw shooting saved us. Glad we got it figured out. That comes from Devin. It's not a bad point. 18 of 21 from the free throw line. That was a big thing. Now, Dallin Hall airballing a free throw, that was a pretty bad look. I felt for the kid because that's one of those that people will never ever let you forget, because when you airball a free throw, it's pretty rough. Econ with Adam, we survived the Curtis Jones legacy game. It's not a bad point. He was absolutely lighting it up in the first quarter, and it was interesting because I said he was jimmering BYU, and that's exactly what he was doing in this matchup. And I think that it's a game that BYU learned, hey, we can have a guy go semi-nuclear on us, and we can find a way around that. They double-teamed him. They blitzed him with the defense, got the ball out of his hands, and he came back down to earth. They did not allow that game to get out of control and allow Curtis Jones to keep going off. That's a big point about this. Devin brings up a good point here. I'm going to throw this up as we go along here. So someone on Twitter saying a Mark Pope coach team loses this game, yay or nay? Curious for y'all's thoughts. Well, that's the interesting thing about this is I felt like under Mark Pope that adjustments defensively were very, very slow to come in game. And that's where I think in this case, like a Curtis Jones, he very well may have kept going like he was, because BYU wouldn't have just adjusted under Mark Pope, I think, quickly enough. That's one thing I love about Kevin Young is he's got a nice stable of coaches working alongside him. Will Voigt, he's the defensive mind. He's the defensive coordinator, for lack of a better term. I know he's the associate head coach as well, but he's the guy who's masterminding BYU's defense. And I'm sure that he was in Kevin Young's ear saying, hey, we got to start blitzing this guy. We may have to sacrifice, playing 4-on-3 at points to double team and get the ball out of his hands. Guess what? It worked out because you cooled him off, and he did not go off in the second half and allow BYU to stay in this game. So it was a really, really nice thing to see that late. Kyle Mercer makes a very good point here, and also answers, I think, the question that Alan had. He throws this up here. Kyle says, Trey Stewart shut down Curtis Jones, and that goes in line with what Alan said here. Why was Mag out down the stretch? I think it's simply put, Trey Stewart was balling out. I think Kevin Young rewarded Trey for what he was doing on the defensive end of the court, saying, hey, Mawit, we're going to sit you here. We're going to let you get a little extra rest. We're going to ride Trey here. And Trey, he delivered. He was really, really good on defense in this game. He had a couple of big threes, obviously, but it's one of those games that, yeah, you ride the hot hand. And in that circumstance, I think it was Trey Stewart's ability to play lockdown defense that allowed them to say, hey, Mawit, take a seat over there. When we need you, we'll call you. And to Trey's credit, he kept going. Devin, I'm so happy when they put Trey in. Yeah, it was really fun to see this team go about this. Payson Cougar fan, don't know how much my heart can take. Go Cougars. It was a fun game. I call it a barn burner. It's exactly what it was, but it was a fun game. It really was. High-level hoops. Teams going back and forth. Caden says this historic game. I loved watching it, even though it was pretty scary there for a bit with the kissy face emoji. Not wrong, Caden. It was a fun game. And it was one of those games that you sit and say, okay, what could have happened? What could have happened had BYU not adjusted when they did in multiple circumstances here? Now, final word on the comments here comes from my good friend Justin Mace. Should the Cougs have just mailed it in to rest up for the real tourney? There is that argument. But I think, I hate to say it, Houston may take care of that for BYU tomorrow, where they may oust them in the semifinals. And then at that point, BYU can rest up. But this is a game. There are going to be some tired legs, I think, from this BYU team, because they pushed the pace at a very, very high tempo. But it was a thrilling game, a back and forth one, and really, really entertaining. So big win. I said it before, survive and advance. It's all you can do this time of year. It's one and done in this circumstance when it comes to the Big 12 tournament. And obviously the bigger prize is still on the horizon with the NCAA tournament. And that's where it'll be fun to see how this team performs. But it's a styles clash when it comes to the NCAA tournament. That's the thing about this. The BYU team is showing that they can win in a myriad of ways. Cougar Tracks, great time to be a Cougar fan. No doubt there. IMMGW says this team is clearly better on both offense and defense than last year's teams. Pope's team would have lost this. I'm having a hard time disagreeing with you, because I really do think that Pope team would have been slower to adjust than what this Kevin Young team has shown. Because this Kevin Young-led squad, they have proven when something doesn't work, they will flip the script almost immediately and try something different. That's a really, really nice thing to have in your back pocket. All right. Final stanza of today's show coming up next. We're going to get to your questions. I promised our Locked On Cougars Insider group I would get to their questions. Some football, some basketball. We'll get to those next as you roll on right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends. A word from our friends over at now Intuit TurboTax. I had the wrong word there. Taxes are obviously leave you wondering and waiting if you're going to get any money back, and then you're sitting there waiting for when the tax return is actually going to show up. Now, taxes, all you got to do is match up with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. And the best part is an expert who will give you your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, all while you get real-time updates on their progress. You can focus on everything else going on in your life and your day. An expert will find every deduction possible, file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy, all so you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is taxes. Get an expert now on turbotax.com. Now, it's only available TurboTax Live service. Also, real-time updates available only in the iOS mobile app, and see guarantee details at turbotax.com/guarantees. Once again, get matched up with an expert today and get started on your TurboTax. Get matched up with your TurboTax expert today at turbotax.com. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. One quick reminder for you guys to join the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. Get the opportunity to ask questions of me live on the show. That's a way to do that. Now, I threw this out yesterday to our Locked On Cougars group and Insiders group and said, hey, what questions you guys want for the mailbag? So the interesting part about this is these questions were all over the place with basketball and football. Let's start off with this one, though. Chris Kral. Jake, the University of Four Underscores, it's University of Utah, we can say the name, is planning to build a new Huntsman Center. The Marriott Center was built just 2 years later. Have you heard any rumblings about that we might follow in Little Brother's path, luxury boxes, etc.? Now, Chris, to answer the question, I have not heard much, if anything, about what BYU might be doing with regards to the future of the Marriott Center. I acknowledge that fact. Do I think they should consider some things? Absolutely. The current concourse, it's way too cramped and small for the current situation of BYU basketball games. If you ever try and walk the concourse of the Marriott Center, and I do it often going to the games I go to, is that the different queues that get stacked up at the different concession stands, they can get all the way to the back wall and allow no flow to go around. So they need to consider expanding the concourse at minimum. I don't think at this juncture that they're going to rebuild the Marriott Center, because they've actually, the Marriott Center, for what it is, for how old it is, it's in remarkably good shape. They've done a really good job with the upkeep. I know that Utah's announced they want to switch out the Huntsman Center and move it elsewhere on their campus, but we're talking that they want to do that in the next decade, and it could take some time to figure out what they're going to do, how they're going to do it. I will also say this. If BYU were to ever rebuild the Marriott Center, will they really build it with 18,000 seats once again? That's the big question. That's one thing I do wonder about. Other questions here coming in. If you had to choose between a conference championship and a Sweet 16 run, which would you choose? This comes from Bryce. Well, I'm going to answer that question right now. Sweet 16 run. Thank you very much. Or how many wins would it take in the NCAA tournament that you would trade a Big 12 conference championship? Okay, I guess the only way I would trade a Big 12 conference championship versus an NCAA is a one and done versus a Big 12 title. Like that's maybe the only trade-off. And even then, I have a hard time taking anything from the NCAA. That's the only way I think it would work out, the math in my mind, to feel comfortable with that. So, Bryce, hopefully that answers your question, but absolutely, it's the Sweet 16. You take that every single time. You want to see them make a run in the NCAA tournament, because that's really when the legacy is made. Big 12 tournament titles, great, so be it. But they're going to say, oh, you won the Big 12 tournament title and you lost in the first round? Who cares? That's the fact of the matter here. Eric Butler, is there anybody on the basketball team you expect to hit the transfer portal once the season is over? Easy answer, yes. Who? No idea. Now, the thing is, the transfer portal is so ubiquitous now, and especially with how much NIL money is flowing around, especially when it comes from BYU, is that I expect BYU to lose guys to the portal, but also they're going to bring guys in via the portal as well. There are going to be a lot of college basketball players who look at what Kevin Young and the BYU basketball team have done and say, hey, I want to play in that system. And if Kevin Young and their evaluation of these players say, hey, we want that guy, they have the NIL resources, at least based on the precedent that guys like A.G. DeBonsa have shown, to go out there and pay the amount of money it's going to take to get top shelf talent into this program. So I really think that you look at the situation at hand is, yes, there are going to be guys who leave BYU just because they want playing time. Maybe they don't feel like they fit in the Kevin Young system, whatever the reason is. But at the same time, they will replace those guys with guys from the portal. And in some respects, they may even upgrade the roster and talent base via the portal as well. All right, some football questions real quick as well before we go here on today's show. Rob asked this. I wonder if Kalani Sitake is trying to help guys on the roster who are likely to get cut find a home. He says that. Now, that's the interesting part about this, is that there is going to be a cut down from 123 players to 105-man rosters in college football. That's at least 18 guys per program across the country at the FBS level who are going to be looking for a new home. Kalani's been very straight up about being willing to help guys find landing spots, whether it's at another FBS institution, dropping to the FCS level. The cut down that's coming here in the spring, it's not going to be pretty, because there's going to be thousands of kids who are scrambling trying to find a new spot, and it's going to be like musical chairs. The music's going to stop, and there's going to be a lot of guys left without a chair, and their careers may be over at that point. A lot of guys are going to have to drop down a level potentially to go from, like, let's say the power 4 where BYU's at to the G5 to the FCS, and on down through D2, D3, and NAIA. And that's kind of, it's a sucky situation, but it's just kind of the reality of where things stand right now with the BYU football program, but they're not the only ones. There's 136 other FBS programs who have to cut down their rosters, and it's going to leave thousands of kids without a home and a roster to play on. And it's not going to be pretty. I think a lot of guys' feelings are going to be hurt. A lot of guys' dreams of playing college football are going to be over in an instant, and it's going to be a really, really tough time. But I know Kalani will do his absolute darndest to help his guys out. He's been clearly looking at that leading up to the end of last season, throughout spring camp right now, and then obviously throughout the summer. He'll be looking to help the guys that they do end up letting go at BYU try and find a new home. But very well just may be the case. There's not enough spots for enough guys, and that sucks. All right, Brian, who is the number one surprise standout in spring camp who will make the most impact next fall? Ooh, good question. I would say right now, Keelan Marion. And that sounds like a weird answer. Hear me out on this. Keelan Marion is an All-American kick returner. Obviously, a phenomenal special teams weapon for BYU. But what I have seen from him in spring camp so far is he is now becoming Keelan Marion, the bona fide stud wide receiver. He is taking advantage of guys like Chase Stewart, Parker Kingston, et cetera, who are not in practice right now. And all Keelan does during practice when we're out there is make plays. He is becoming a well-rounded weapon. His special teams ability will absolutely still help him when it comes to getting on the field. But if he can inject himself more as a wide receiver, that's even more opportunities to play. And it sure looks like he's doing a really good job of rounding into, I think, will be a top maybe 2 or 3 wide receiver on this BYU roster. So really interested to see what happens on this. And then we have the last question here to Reagan. There's a few more, but we're going to run out of time here. It says, what does the cornerback situation look like right now? That'd be a huge question of mine. Front seven looks really good. Safety room looks good. Cornerback is my concern after how good they were last season and losing so many players. Okay, Reagan, I would be concerned if a guy like Maury Bamba had not returned to BYU for this year. Maury Bamba, Evan Johnson. You also inject Trey Alexander into that mix. Jonathan Capella, who Jay Hill has shouted out as being a standout in spring camp so far. Those 4 alone are cause for excitement when it comes to the cornerback room for BYU football. The other guy I would inject to that conversation is Marcus McKenzie. Marcus finally looks fully healthy for the first time in 2 years. Similar to the situation I just talked about with Keelan Marion. He's a special teams ace as a gunner. He gets down the field and makes big plays on special teams. Well, what I've seen from him in spring camp so far is he's finally coming into his own as a cornerback and making plays, covering wide receivers, swatting balls, catching interceptions, that type of stuff. And if that continues, that's a nice 5-man core at cornerback that, yeah, you lose guys like a Jacob Robinson and who else am I thinking of from last year's squad? You lose those guys. That's cause for concern. But the nice part is the pieces are still there. And I will also add the ace in the hole, Gennaro Guilford. That guy gets the absolute best out of every single one of his guys. So long as Gennaro Guilford is coaching up BYU's corners, I'm going to be pretty happy with how things look for BYU on the back end of that defense. And I've got faith that he will find the right combination or combinations of guys to help BYU have more success. So as always, a lot of fun stuff on today's show. Fun to do this live, by the way, do a full podcast live with us. But thanks for your comments. Thanks for weighing in and being along for the ride. I think we peaked out at like 250, 270 concurrent subscribers watching this. By the way, if you are watching this and you're not subscribed to the Locked On Cougars channel, do it right now. We're pushing towards 10,000 subscribers. We're just north of 500 away from that goal. If you are not subscribed to us, there's a little bell notification thing, if I can point the right way, right down here. It says subscribe to the show. Well, join us today and get the latest on BYU sports every single day with this podcast. So we're here for you Monday through Friday, talking all things BYU. So as always, you guys are the best. Thank you for all your support. And we'll be back again tomorrow with another full edition of Locked On Cougars, getting you ready for BYU in Houston or Colorado. We'll find out soon. But thanks as always for being a part of the show right here on Locked On Cougars.